welcome every single one of you to the Athenaeum of Philadelphia's Fall Virtual Speaker Series. This is a very special program tonight done in concert with Richard de Wingard and Headhouse Books. Liz Moore, an amazing author, her recent book, Long Bright River, has been released in paperback today, so we're celebrating that with moderator Kiley Reid. So I actually get to sit back tonight after welcoming you all and let other people do the work, which is just a joy. If you're brand new to the Athenaeum and this is the first time coming on board, I welcome you all. The Athenaeum is one of the oldest continuously circulating libraries in the United States. Here on Washington Square, we are a community of people who love books, who love talking about books, writing books, some of us, not all of us, not me, and imagining and thinking and exploring new ideas and learning together. We invite you, if you enjoyed tonight's program, to check out our other virtual programming and to think about becoming a member and expanding our community, because we love everybody who comes in who wants to share their ideas and their thoughts and to learn and have great conversations together. Before I introduce our guests, I want to remind you all, if you are on a computer, you should see at the bottom a Q&A and a chat. Please use two of those anytime during this program to put your questions down for Liz or Kiley. Kiley's moderating, so she may decide not to answer questions to herself, but she may decide to do that as well. She gets that choice. So don't wait until the end. Go ahead and put questions as they arise, and Kiley will answer them for you. Tonight's guests are really special guests. We are so lucky to live in a place like Philadelphia that brings amazing authors from elsewhere to come and make home and make us an even more brilliant and vibrant city. Two of those authors are with us tonight. Liz Moore, who holds an MFA in fiction from Hunter College and has lived in Philadelphia since winning the University of Pennsylvania's Arts Edge residency in 2009. You may remember won the 2012 Athenaeum Literary Award for her second novel, Heft, which was another amazing piece of work. The novel was published in 5 countries and was longlisted for their International Impact Dublin Literary Award and was included in several Best of 2012 lists, including those of NPR and the Apple iBookstore. After winning a 2014 Rome Prize in Literature, she spent 2014 and 15 at the American Academy in Rome, completing her 3rd novel, The Unseen World. Her 4th novel, which we're celebrating tonight, Long Bright River, was published by Riverhead Books in January 2020. It was an instant New York Times bestseller and has become an international bestseller as well, with translations to be published in 18 different territories to date. It was a Book of the Month Club and the January selection for Good Morning America Book Club, and it is currently being made into a television adaptation. So I invite you, we're just talking about TV shows. If you haven't read Long Bright River yet, pick it up and read it. You're going to love it. And then be prepared to watch when it comes out on TV. And tonight, Liz is going to be in conversation with another amazing author who came a little more recently to Philadelphia, Kiley Reid, who is an Arizona native and a recent graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, where she was the recipient of the Truman Capote Fellowship. Her New York Times bestselling debut novel, Such a Fun Age. Again, if you haven't read it, check it out. We have both these books at the Athenaeum, and I know there's waiting lists for both of them, but it's worth getting on that waiting list or buy it from Headhouse Books. It is also currently in development by Lena Waitha's Hillman Grad Productions and Sight Unseen Pictures. So again, read the books, and then you're going to get to see, is it going to be a movie, Kiley, or a TV show?
I'm not allowed to say, but it'll be good, I promise.
I'm not allowed to say. It's going to be something, and something amazing with Lena Waitha, right?
Yes.
Her novel was longlisted for the 2020 Booker Prize, and it was a finalist for the New York Public Library's 2020 Young Lions Fiction Award, the NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literary Work by a Debut Author, and the Mark Twain American Voice in Literature Award. Kiley's writing has been featured in the New York Times, Playboy, the Wall Street Journal, Lumina, where her short story was the winner in the 2017 Flash Prose Contest, and Plowshares, where her short story was the winner of the 2020 Ashley Lee Bourne Prize for Fiction. I suspect, Kylie, that your career is like Liz, and you're going to have a highly acclaimed, award-winning book after award-winning book as Liz does, and we have many more to come for both of you. But right now, I get to shut up and turn the screen over to both of you, who are good friends and companions in writing, and we get to hear about Liz's book and about the writing life. Thank you, and I invite everybody to welcome both Liz Moore and Kiley Reid to the Athenaeum of Philadelphia tonight.
Thank you so much, Beth. Thank you, thank you. Liz, happy Paperback Pub Day. I'm so happy to be here with you.
I appreciate it. And I can't tell you how grateful I am for you moderating this event. I know you do many events in your life, so it's very, very kind of you to take the hour.
These are the good ones for sure. I wish we were in person. I feel like I keep saying that this year, but the next one we will do it. So let's get right in. And if someone was living under a rock this year and had never heard of Long Bright River and you were in an elevator, what would the pitch be?
Okay, so Long Bright River is set here in Philadelphia, specifically in the neighborhood of Kensington, which is one of the neighborhoods in the US that has been particularly hard hit by the opioid crisis. It tells the story of two sisters, the older of whom is a police officer who patrols the district that includes Kensington. And her younger sister is suffering from opioid addiction and doing sex work to support her addiction. And she goes missing toward the beginning of the novel at the same time that a string of murders is occurring in the neighborhood. And so although the sisters are estranged, the older sister, Mickey, kind of takes it upon herself to go looking for her younger sister out of a loyalty to her that grows out of a shared difficult childhood. And that's my elevator pitch. We'd be on like the 40th floor by now though, so I should probably sharpen that.
I feel like there's so much happening and so many things covered, and that pitch really sets us up nicely with these sisters and this really complicated relationship. Can you talk about what was the origin of this book, and was it the characters that really brought you in, or was it this crisis that really intrigued you? What was this first spark for Long Bright River?
Absolutely. Also, before we dive in, I'm just going to point out, just because Tess put it in the chat, tonight's event is being co-sponsored by the Athenaeum, which is an amazing organization that you should all donate to, being that it's Giving Tuesday. And also Headhouse Books, which is my local indie bookstore, the bookstore that's closest to me, and the bookstore that I love. And I am, because I am buddies with Richard, who owns it, going to go over there at some point and in a safe and socially distant way, personally sign and inscribe all the copies of the Long Bright River paperback that are purchased tonight. So you can see this little link here in the chat box. I don't think you're actually able to click through, but if you copy and paste that link into an internet browser, it should take you right to this the page where it gives you instructions on how to purchase the paperback and where to insert the inscription that you want for a holiday gift or for yourself or whatever you like. And I encourage you to support Headhouse and all indie bookstores. And if you're not interested in buying Long Bright River, that is a-okay. Buy something else from Headhouse Books because they're awesome. And now I will tell you about the origins of Long Bright River. So when I first moved to Philly 11 years ago, I wasn't really up on Kensington and what it was. I knew of it as a neighborhood north of where I was living with a very long history. But back then, the local media and the national media weren't really reporting on it as a part of the opioid crisis that we're very familiar with today. And so a photographer friend of mine invited me to the neighborhood to conduct interviews with the subjects of the portraits that he was making. And in doing that, I got to know a lot of stories very quickly and was very moved by what I heard, and sort of found myself pulled back to the neighborhood over and over again. I probably went up with Jeff about 6 times, not all that many times, but I think I was so interested in the stories that I was hearing about how people sort of became addicted to opioids and the difficulties that they were facing within a neighborhood where it was very, very easy to access opioids, and also a neighborhood that had been failed by many systems in a variety of ways, which we'll get into. That I returned to the neighborhood over and over again on my own after that, partly to do sort of nonfiction sketches, and partly to do community work. I ended up becoming involved with an organization called St. Francis Inn, which many of you on this call might be familiar with. It's mainly known as a provider of food and food services to the neighborhood, but it does a lot more than that, including when I began my affiliation with the organization, it was there was a women's day shelter there called the Thea Bowman Center, and I led free writing workshops for clients of the day shelter for a time. And in doing that, I sort of became very inspired to try to write fiction. And I think my personal connection to the material and to the neighborhood is that my own family has several generations of addiction in it. And so I think that was sort of the emotional spark that pulled me back to the neighborhood over and over again.
Yes, totally. I think, in life, it's so often people say like, what was that one thing? As if it's a very simple story, but it's like everything, it's a lot of things really, really generating what's coming out next. So that makes a lot of sense. This book is also very much about place. And I know for us personally, that's the reason that we know each other is I DM'd Liz saying, hey, your book's in Philly, so is mine. What's up? She said, let's get coffee. And I'm so glad you did. But with a book that's so specific into place, there's a lot of responsibility placed on the author. And, I currently live in Fishtown, and it was such a delight for me to see little references to Circle Thrift, or I can't really go on Front Street without thinking of it. And so I'm curious how you picked what settings to place people in, what concerns you had about representing the city, and maybe what your research looks like with these places.
Yeah. So Long Bright River is my first book set in Philadelphia. I've never set a book in a place where I haven't lived. I'm not ruling it out I may do that at some point. But my first two books were set in New York City, and specifically Brooklyn, where I was living. And my third book was set in Boston. I grew up outside of Boston. Long Bright River is set here. And I have to say, even though I've lived here the longest in my adult life, I still had a lot of trepidation about setting a book here, because I still feel in some ways like an outsider to Philadelphia, and certainly to Kensington. I've never lived in Kensington, and it's a neighborhood that has it's such a supportive community, and it's also, I think, an insular community. And out of sort of necessity, it's a very sort of it is a community that is protective of itself, as it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I still feel a sense of trepidation when I talk about Kensington, also because in any event that I do, especially ones connected to Philadelphia organizations like the Athenaeum, I have no doubt that some people attending either are from Kensington themselves, or have family history in Kensington, or a strong personal connection to Kensington. And so I always have this sense of nervousness about, well, what did I get wrong and what did I get right? And then I tell myself that I am a writer of fiction, and that is, a sort of very important part of my approach to writing is premised on the idea that fiction is an imagining of a neighborhood that's different than reporting. And so I intentionally have altered some of the landscape of Kensington. There is, for example, a climactic scene that occurs in a cathedral that is based on a real place that many people may recognize, but is called something different and is located at a different intersection. And I've done that in all of my books. I've sort of invented places when I've needed to bend the rules for the sake of story, and called them different things. And in this case, it was no different. But yeah, I think people who are actually from Kensington will recognize certain things about Kensington and will also recognize inventions about Kensington.
I do that too. I get inspired by something and I'm like, let me call it something else so that I can make it serve the story. Totally. Let's talk about genre a little bit. So, you know, I have both been to MFA programs, and I think genre is such a interesting topic because sometimes workshops get derailed by everyone saying, what is this? What is this? And that's like what you go home thinking about. You're like, why do I need to know what this is? This is called a thriller. This is called literary fiction. This is like a literary thriller in some ways, but it definitely, you know, changes the way that people come into your novel and the way people approach your art. And so what do you feel about those genre titles, and how do those labels potentially shape your process when you realize there's a thriller element to this thing that I'm writing?
So I did not set out to write a thriller when I began Long Bright River. The first thing that came to me and sort of the heart of the story in my estimation of it is the sort of the sisterly bond that exists. And I think of it as a family mystery as much as anything else. And that is quite similar. That's quite a similar project to all the other books I've ever written. My most recent 3 books, Heft and The Unseen World and Long Bright River, all are what I would call family mysteries, where members of a family for various reasons are either lying or keeping quiet about certain elements of things that have happened in their past. And the mystery, the sort of central narrative tension of the book is contained in figuring out why they're not telling the truth about their past or what they're concealing about their past. Mickey and Casey, the 2 sisters, were the first characters who arrived to me. That's probably not surprising. Casey, I knew would be somebody who is suffering from addiction and doing sex work to support her addiction. Mickey at first was a teacher. She actually wasn't a police officer. In the first scene I ever wrote in Long Bright River, she was a high school English teacher who had sort of chosen a quote unquote like respectable path and was doing her best in her life. And it quickly became clear to me that there wasn't actually enough tension between the sisters. They didn't have enough at stake, or they weren't at odds enough to sustain a novel length project. And so her police work came out of a feeling that I wanted to make these sisters as opposite as they could be, to make them complete foils for one another, people who were extremely close as children and had this very, very deep bond and a love for each other, but who found themselves on opposite sides of almost everything as adults. So Mickey is somebody who, especially at the start of the novel, sees herself as somebody who's always made the right choices in life and is actively engaged in the project of justifying everything about herself, her existence, her work, and is sort of intentionally turning a blind eye to the immoral decisions that she's made in life personally, and also to the potentially immoral decisions being made in her workplace, or to sort of like the immorality of the system that she's part of. And then all of a sudden, when she became a police officer, I was sort of like, well, I may be writing a police procedural, and now I'm going to interrogate that genre and figure out, which I love, by the way. I love detective fiction and film, and I told you I love, true crime documentaries and books as well. And I'm an avid consumer of all of those media, and so it was kind of a pleasure once I committed to that genre to take what conventions of it I found really worked and sort of discard others and go from there.
I love hearing about that process because, especially from an English teacher, you see that she has this very, very wholesome, thing going on. And then in making her even more opposite, which it's still more complicated with her sister. And so I love hearing that, authors are listening to what the story required. I have to ask, like, whenever I make a change, like if I change a character's name, I feel like I have to like mourn it for like 3 days. And it kind of sets me back, where you feel like, oh no, like I have like a lot of research to do now that this is a police officer.
Yeah, there's always I think, Kylie, you probably feel this too. Anytime you make a decision that feels right for the book, but that will require a huge amount of work or backtracking or rewriting, I do feel like there's a day long or week long or sometimes month long process of like, do I really
So,
do I have
yeah,
to? And then you sort of like spend a lot of time starting new documents and sort of like tiptoeing in that direction and seeing if there's any way around it. And I definitely did do a lot of that. Do you do that too?
all the time, all the time. Just like, it, even if it's not the right decision, that you can't continue unless you explore it and go down that avenue a little bit to figure out why it isn't. But it's so difficult. I'm also curious if Casey and Mickey were their names from the beginning. I love discussing names in books.
Mickey, Casey was always Casey, Kacey. She was that. Mickey, I took forever. Her real name in the book is Michaela. I knew it would be like a sort of more formal given name that she would cling to as sort of a name with like gravitas and something that she wishes she were called, and then a sort of more affectionate family nickname that she didn't particularly like and sort of like had a grudge about. But there were all kinds of, for a time she was Mary, there was, there were a lot of changes. I think I was, even when I finally came to Mickey, there was something about like Mickey Fitzpatrick, which is her name. It was like Irish McIrish person. Like I didn't love it for that reason. I was like, am I stepping over a line here? And then slowly there was a feeling of, you just sort of they start to feel real. And then at a certain point, you can't change their name because that's what their name is, that's who they are.
Yeah, totally. Yes. And some characters just present themselves so clearly to you, and the other ones, it's like, take 3 months to figure out what I am. So this is a story about addiction, about loneliness, about systemic problems, about poverty. And I'm curious, what was the most challenging part about writing the entire story?
I think there were probably 2 big challenges. One was approaching the material with sensitivity and the knowledge that a lot of people would be reading this from a lot of different sort of backgrounds and angles. I knew that people experiencing addiction actively or in recovery from addiction would be reading it. I knew family members of people with addiction would be reading it. I knew people from Kensington, including people I know and have spoken to, would read it. And I wanted to be certain that the elements of plot and story didn't overwhelm the elements of character and being sensitive to people's lived experiences with all of those things. And then speaking of story and plot, there subsequently became the challenge of withholding information in a way that felt plausible. So Mickey, that is a first person narrator. And I go back and forth. Sometimes I call her an unreliable narrator, and sometimes I don't like that term for her. I think she's more like a narrator who's in denial, or who has carefully crafted an identity for herself out of sort of self-protection that isn't necessarily entirely correct, but I don't think of her as somebody who's actively lying or actively misleading the reader. Instead, she has, in order to survive, she has created a persona that isn't exactly, that's not how I see her. And that's certainly not how Casey sees her, because she's harmed Casey. She's harmed other people in some of her actions. And she, especially at the beginning, has this construction of herself as correct in all ways. And so that became my mechanism for creating narrative tension. It's like, why would she be withholding this information, and how will she eventually come to the realization that she has to release that information to the reader, and also sort of honestly assess what she's done in her life. So that was a challenge.
Yes, I'm with you on that. And I feel that if she's dishonest, it's out of necessity for her own self. And it's like lies of omission and like crafting a narrative, which is very, very common in human beings. I have a few more, and also everyone else is going to get to be able to ask their own questions. If you have any questions, put them in the little Q&A box down there, and you guys will get answered later. But I'm going to get to one of my favorite scenes in your novel, which I think I mentioned to you the first time we got coffee, which is a birthday party in a McDonald's. I think it's one of my favorite literary choices of an event that should go well and should be okay, and it's not. And so I'm curious about what goes into killing your darlings on a craft level. And also, I just am curious if you've ever had a really terrible birthday at one point.
I went to a lot of birthday parties at McDonald's when I was a kid and loved them. That was like some of my favorite birthday parties were at McDonald's. I don't think I ever had one there myself, but it was a big hit to go to birthday parties at McDonald's in Framingham, Massachusetts when I was a kid. And I distinctly remember ball pits and, I loved Happy Meals when I was a kid, and I didn't get them often. And so it was like a big treat when I did. So maybe I was channeling, my happy memories of McDonald's birthday parties, at the same time as understanding that there is a big class divide that exists in Philadelphia between people who would like or who would host birthday parties at McDonald's for their children, and people who would never think to even go to a McDonald's with their children, because as you probably read in the book, I think there are people who would never allow their children to eat the food from McDonald's because they would perceive it as unhealthy, rightfully. But it's there are a lot of people for whom McDonald's is a treat. And when I was a kid, I was one of them. And so there was something about planning that scene. It was one of those scenes that I could see coming down the pike, and knew that it would be kind of challenging to write, and also that it would be sort of fun in a perverse way to write, because it served as, I think you do too, Kiley. I see this in your work, the idea of class intersections creating chaos when you put people from different social worlds together and just kind of like let them coexist and see what awkwardness happens from that. That's one of my favorite things to do in writing. I hate to watch it, but I do think it creates for really strong narrative tension. And Long Bright River, among many things, is a novel about class and class intersections here in Philadelphia, which happen all around us every day. And so, there are different kind of like groups of people in Long Bright River, and one of them is newcomers to Philadelphia. And I am one, I am a newcomer to Philadelphia. I live in a middle-class neighborhood in Philadelphia. I, in many ways, probably would be perceived more like the characters of Lauren, and I actually forget the other character's name, the other mom who comes in. And yet I grew up in a town that was largely working class, around kids who were largely working class. And so I think I'm always interested in kind of like, I don't know, just putting people together who come from different places and like setting them in motion and seeing what happens.
Yes, I feel like the bad version of that is so big, and it has like people, dealing with like the price of a house or something. But those places like a birthday party where you don't think that it exists or that you can get around it is really where it comes out in a really beautiful way. But I also really loved McDonald's birthday parties. When you had like the back room, it felt very like, move out of my way. Like I'm in this back room, which is really nice.
Yeah.
Right. So you and I, our books are very, very different, but there are some pretty interesting similarities. They both have young children who need to be looked after, and that's a big thread. We both have young children who throw up at one point and then also like announce that they threw up at one point. We both have newcomers to Philadelphia. We both have a birthday party that doesn't go well. And we both have novels where there's a bit of a page-turny whodunit effect towards the ending. And so we live in a time like when there's so much like, oh, this person did it, and it's on Twitter, like spoiling things, and just like everyone putting all of their stuff out there. For you, do you ever worry about someone ruining the plot, or do you feel like that's not really for me to worry about? Go ahead and spoil. What are your thoughts on that?
I haven't seen an instance of somebody like actively spoiling it online, at least not that they've, tagged me in. I like to think, I guess, that even if somebody accidentally spoiled the ending, there would still be other parts of the book that that you might enjoy, the family dynamics or something. And I think that's very true of your book as well. Like, you're right, there are several kind of twists that happen toward the end, and there's a highly climactic scene where I was kind of sitting on the edge of my chair when I was reading it. And yet there's so much else to enjoy in your book that, I'd read the first 2/3 of it and get just as much enjoyment out of it as like sort of reading the final third. And I guess that's probably my goal in writing, is to write a book that functions in several different ways and isn't entirely contingent upon story, but it's just as much about character or setting. And I imagine that's true for you as well. How do you feel about it?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, some people do try and ruin things. And I do have a friend who goes, when she picks up a book, she reads the last page, which I think is crazy.
Wow, is she a sociopath? That is.
Might be. So it's hard, but I think that technology presents these things in very interesting ways and kind of shapes how we interact with them. But I don't think I've seen, anything spoiling yours, which is really nice. So I want to get into what we started talking about, which is film. You've written screenplays and you're getting into more television writing. Can you talk about the future of Long Bright River on screen?
In veiled terms, like you, Kiley, I can talk about it as it has been optioned as a limited series, and we are negotiating that. And for whatever reason, I don't know why it's all so veiled in secrecy, but both you and I have been sworn to secrecy beyond that. But yeah, I'll be part of the writing process, which I'm excited about. And I do really enjoy screenwriting, and I have never actually written for television before, but I'm very interested in doing so. So I'm looking forward to kind of learning about it.
When you're approaching fiction stuff versus screenplays, where's your head at?
Screenplays are like math to me. I've written 2 feature-length screenplays, both of which were adaptations of novels that I've written. So I'm actually at work on an original screenplay, but it's a much different beast for me. When I'm adapting a novel of my own, it's sort of like very, very story driven, and you have at most 120 pages of sparse text on each page to tell a similar story, not the same story. But talking about like Killing Your Darlings, you have to have no pride about getting rid of entire characters or entire subplots and entire B and C and D stories that exist in a 490 page novel. Sorry, everyone, Long Great River is very long. That cannot exist in a 120 page screenplay. So, and the same with the other book I adapted into a feature-length screenplay. It's a completely different project, and it has a lot more to do, I think, with math than anything else.
Yes, the one I remember is presenting everyone that's important by page 10. Right. What? In a novel, you're like, no, that's for chapter 6. It's so different.
You can talk about like a walk down the street for 5 pages in a novel.
Yeah, and screen, it's like, no, get to it immediately. I have 2 more questions for you, and then I'm going to get to everybody else's. I am curious about when you set out to write the book. Did the fact that some of these things were coming more into light and seeming more timely, or at least more covered — I think that they've been going on for a long time, but they've been covered in a different way — did that play a role in how you wrote it and in the reception of it?
So I think there's sort of 2 stories in the news this year that have intersected in a timely way with Long Bright River that I didn't plan. I don't think you really can plan what current events will be currently happening when a novel comes out, because as you know, even after you sell, in this case, I sold the manuscript of Long Bright River in 2018, almost a full 2 years before it came out, and I had been working on it before that for several years. So I don't think it's a wise idea to kind of try to calculate what will be in the news unless you're writing a book a year. Instead, I think Long Bright River coincidentally intersected with obviously the opioid crisis that has been happening for, basically since the invention of OxyContin in 1996, if we're being honest, but in a way that the media has been picking up for more than a decade. So that wasn't so much of a coincidence. But another element of Long Bright River that is a bit spoilery, so sorry if anybody hasn't finished it, is that there is a discussion around police corruption and police abuse of power, specific to police sexual assaults on sex workers in Kensington, which had been sort of, there's always been a kind of whisper network about that in Kensington, and it was something that I had picked up just from having a lot of conversations with people in Kensington over the years, and something that I was interested in portraying accurately in Long Bright River. But there was no substantive kind of documentation of that elsewhere, aside from these stories that you would sort of pick up here and there in Kensington, until 2019. So again, after I had already sold the manuscript of Long Bright River, when the Philadelphia Inquirer published an expose of internal police files that they had gained access to, detailing the sort of the consequences for officers who had committed various offenses during their time. At least two of which very closely mirror the stories that I had heard aloud in Kensington. And so, although one shouldn't need sort of like official or authorized substantiation of, personal experience,
Yeah.
women in Kensington, we now have it. And that it feels good to have a record of. And so although Long Bright River is fictional, some of its accounts of police sexual assault on sex workers in Kensington are based in reality.
Right. I think that when issues like that are portrayed in fiction with a really caring hand that also values truth, I think that, I like that intersection of where journalism meets fiction a lot. And we know, I read the book in January when it came out. We were ships crossing in the night with our book tours, which was really fun. It had such a great response as it should have. It was really wonderful. You are a professor at Temple, and I'm curious, my last question is about your students' reception of the novel, if they have one.
I noticed two names scrolling by in the chat here of at least two students from Temple who may be attending. So if you guys feel like chatting and weighing in, you're welcome to. I haven't had actually that many specific conversations about Long Bright River with students, aside from, small, nice comments that they've made along the way. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm in terms of like the reaction in general, it has largely been positive. In, my biggest fear was how will people react in Kensington, and how will people react sort of in Philadelphia as a whole. That has largely been positive, but I am waiting to see if this television adaptation gets made. Television almost always has a larger audience than fiction, and so I'm sort of like bracing myself for maybe potentially a second wave of reactions that might come from that.
That's a really good point. Yes, television, tricky game, but we will be there for you no matter what. Okay, so I'm going to dive into some of the questions here. And one of them just goes off of what you were just talking about, which is how do the residents, Megan asked, how do the residents of Kensington feel about how you portrayed it and have you received feedback? Yeah, I'm curious about the feedback you received from residents.
So yeah, I intentionally gave the manuscript of Long Bright River to a number of the people I know in Kensington, both people working for organizations like Prevention Point and St. Francis Inn, and also some of the men and women that I've gotten to know in Kensington over the years. And again, they were positive, the reactions were positive, but I also want to make room for the idea that like those are people I know. And so, you know, I'm certain there's also an element of kindness and politeness and, you know, and all that. I have heard from a lot of people with family roots in Kensington, and actually a couple of people I had no personal connection to, who are current residents of Kensington. And they have largely been kind. A couple of people have had specific questions about the cathedral that I portray, and is it possible that you were portraying, you know, this church where I went to church when I was a kid? And I tell them yes, it was, and that's been interesting. A lot of people have very, very interesting stories about Kensington, the way it was when they were growing up, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, this kind of goes right on with that. Seth asks, I really like this question. As a Bensalem native with close ties to Kensington and the Philadelphia area, I was really surprised to see Bensalem mentioned by name, and also such specificity in the names of city locals mentioned in the books. But it also gave me a deeper appreciation for and connection to the story that I might not have had otherwise. Did you provide this kind of specificity intentionally, knowing the names of the locales would evoke in some readers a deeper connection?
A couple answers to that question. One is for the first 7 years I lived in Philly, I worked at Holy Family University up in the far northeast in Tarsdale. And so Bensalem, a lot of our students came from Bensalem, which is sort of right over the border, as you know, Seth, from Philadelphia. And it seemed right to me that Mickey would have, in effect, like fled there or gone there after she moved away from Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Because it's close enough to be not a bad commute while being just over the city border. Specificity of names. I partly have my husband to thank for that, who grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia and is a huge Philly sports fan. And so it made sense for there to be a bunch of sports references in Long Bright River based on some of the characters. And so generally speaking, that was him. He was my encyclopedia of Philly sports.
That's amazing. I like putting the partners to work for these. That's good. So
he likes Cecily Tynan, and I also like Cecily Tynan. She's pretty great.
Oh, I love her. She's amazing. Yes. So speaking of names, Helene wants to know, did you give the name Truman because he is a true man? Not telling you ways he might be. That is not a spoiler. Don't worry. So,
Truman is a name that I think popped into my head that might have had some symbolic significance. One of the reasons I ended up liking it is because he's kind of a red herring. Again, we're getting so spoilery. Like, is he true? Is he really true? Or is he not true? Or is he like a suspect or not a suspect? And I think there's maybe some reverse psychology where, you know, if he's truly, could he be the true killer? I don't know. I'm getting to the real answer is that I didn't, you know, the name occurred to me without that much calculation. And then I grew to like the name because I thought it could go either way in terms of whether or not he was a suspect.
Yes. Yes. I love when people ask questions like that because it makes us seem smarter than we are in some ways. Because so many people have asked me like, oh, did you name your character Amira because she's like a mirror to me? And I just, yeah, like I didn't. Just like the name. Yeah. Okay, so one of my favorite things to talk about is writing schedule and process. And Caitlin wants to know, Do you have a set writing schedule, or do you write whenever the opportunity presents itself?
Okay, so pre-pandemic, I always went to one of about 3 coffee shops in my neighborhood and would put on white noise in my headphones to block out a certain amount of conversation around me while still having visual stimuli, because I work well that way. And I would typically go there when I was teaching at Holy Family. I had a different work schedule. I would typically go there like on my 2 off days, and that was what I did. Now that I'm at Temple, where my work is a little bit more kind of confined to specific moments, I try to write actually all the days I'm not specifically in class at Temple.
Mhm.
And these days I've never done this before, so I guess my practice is evolving a little. I aim for about 500 words a day, and however long that takes me is however long it takes me. And if I am on a roll, sometimes I'll go beyond that, but these days I'm not on that much of a roll. So every 500 words feels like a real triumph.
How long does that usually take you?
I feel like you're like, I'll show you mine if you show me yours. Depends on the day. Probably like 2 or 3 hours.
Same.
About that.
Yes, yes. I just did an event with Ruman Alam, and he said that he did the draft of his novel in 3 weeks, and I was like,
I'm sorry.
I know, and it's so good. So yeah, he's not real.
Leave it that. There's another one of my favorite books in the world is The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, who did all this incredible research for the character, the narrator of that book, for like, I don't know, a year or more. So much sort of intense research, and then, as far as I can remember, effectively shut himself in a room like a monk for a month. And I think his partner would just like bring him food, and he never really left, only to shower or something, and wrote the draft of that book in a month. So I know it's possible to write a perfect book in a month, but it's not my world. I don't know how to do that.
I don't want to read my writing after like hour 14 of editing. I can do all day, but actual writing, not gonna happen. Allie wants to know, what is your biggest writing challenge? Does it change from one project to another? And what was the biggest challenge in this one, Long Red River specifically?
Probably my biggest writing challenge is the feeling of like losing momentum. That, I think every book is for me, every book feels very exciting when I begin it. And then I get into a place that, this is 90% of writing for me, is the feeling of like, does this book stink? I think it might be terrible, boring.
Yep.
Nobody's going to like it, and that's really my daily work, is feeling that feeling and convincing myself to proceed. And that's the moment, that I'm in right now with this next book. And I would say my biggest obstacle is just kind of overcoming that feeling every day, and feeling assured that that's a natural part of the process, and you do just have to kind of write through it. And then at a certain point you hit your stride again, and then you can go back and clean up the boring parts. Kiley, can you answer that question too? What's your biggest?
You said.
What I said? Okay.
What you said, well, I think the biggest challenge sometimes, that's so hard. Sometimes for me, it's panicking, like balancing the panic between structure and craft and heart, of just saying, just get it out there, but also like, don't worry about that part till later. I feel like what I try to do is so plot driven that sometimes my energy for a scene that I'm not sure if it needs to exist or not, I feel like I'm not putting enough into it, because I know it like might be deleted. So that's hard, especially because I love plot so much. So it's also, I don't know how to say like the everydayness of just being a writer and
putting words
down for sure. I like this question from Caitlin. Do you recall the moment you knew you wanted to be a writer?
I deferred that moment of realization for many years. And it was sort of like, I don't know, I just was like pushing it away, like, don't come for me, voice, go away. I don't feel like I can be a writer. because I loved writing, and it was sort of the only thing it was one of the things I got a lot of positive feedback about as a kid and even as a college student. And yet I wasn't very practical, and so never wanted to like lay claim to that title for a very long time. And even after I had published my first book, still sort of thought, well, I'll do something else. That was kind of a fluke. And then finally I just said, I don't really have any other ideas for what I'd like to do. And I really do love this. So, I mean, listen, I was like 26 years old the first time I felt like a writer, which doesn't sound that, old, all things considered, but given how long I had been actively writing, at that point, it did take me a while to really admit it to myself, I guess.
Yes, the finances has such a big effect on that too. It's like, well, I am a writer, but I'm not getting paid. It's tricky.
Exactly. I've never not done something else at the same time as writing. I've always taught, for example. And I was working at a museum, and I actually was nannying for a time, which made me love such a fun age for that reason. So yeah.
Finish up with 2 questions. Let's see. Okay, yes. First one is, what are you working on now? From Liz.
Oh, hi, Liz. I'm working on my next novel, and I am working on just finished up pitching the television adaptation, which actually takes a huge amount of work to develop that pitch. And assuming it lands someplace, which it seems likely to, will then move into working on the television adaptation itself, and always teaching in the MFA program at Temple.
This is 3 very big jobs. And who are the authors you read, and what are you reading right now?
So I just started a book that, oh no, it's falling down. I was a long time ago, New Wilderness by Diane Cook. Is it backwards in your?
No, this is really weird. I know that she was longlisted for the Booker too. We both got the news on our birthdays, which are the same day. So I feel very connected to her.
It's really good. And it's sort of, I don't know, post-apocalyptic, but not in a really super stressful way. I don't know. It's a lot about the environment and nature and changes therein. What else? I just read and loved Luster by Raven Leilani, which I also taught an excerpt of this fall, and was absolutely floored by the prose and the way that she turns sentences into something new every time she writes a sentence. I was very, very kind of inspired by all of the way that she uses words.
Totally.
Yeah, the 2 most recent, very, very new books too. So you can buy those from Headhouse too if you don't want to buy Long Bright River.
There you go. But you
and
probably
Kiley's book. I've all heard book, and she doesn't need any more publicity from me, but it's incredible, and it's also set here in Philadelphia.
Guys, listen, even if you have the hardback of Long Bright River, you can buy a nice paperback to send to a friend for the holidays. It's so good. There's class, there's poverty, there's sisters, there's a lot of systemic issues. If you like Philly, which I'm sure everyone listening to this does, you'll be really, really pleased. So Liz, I love chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Incredibly generous of you to host this, and I love chatting with you too. And maybe on a warm day we can meet in a park 10 feet away from each other, as we do. I see Tess posting that link to Headhouse again in the comments, and yeah, support your local independent bookstore.
Absolutely, yes. I love that both of our local bookstores start with H's, Harriet's Bookshop.
But yeah, there are many good ones to support.
The Headhouse is great. I think maybe I close out, or I don't know if I should wait for.
I'll close you out. But yeah, thank you, Kiley and Liz. This has been a wonderful conversation. I hope everybody who loves to read has been inspired to read more. Everybody who writes and is working to write has been inspired by listening to both of you talking about that craft of writing, and wants to go out and try to write your 500 words a day. This has just been wonderful. Thank you to Headhouse Books for helping to organize and co-sponsoring this event. Remind you, you can buy the book. You can buy both Liz's, all of her books, and Kiley's book, Such a Fun Age, also Along Bright River and Such a Fun Age, through Headhouse Books. If you want to buy books for your friends and family for the holidays, do that. And then if you want to check out a copy at the Athenaeum for yourself, go ahead and do that. We have those options too. Let's all support our wonderful writers. We hope that everybody has a wonderful evening, and we're so grateful to both of you so graciously sharing your time and your knowledge and wisdom and gifts with us. Thank you. Wish everyone a wonderful night.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it. All right. Bye, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.